Okay, so we now have our completed SIPOC, which we can use going forward to investigate the improvements that this coffee shop is looking to make. Now, let's look at something else the SIPOC will give us, and that's some measures that, again, we can look to in the next phase of DMAIC when we get into the measure phase. So if you think back to your voice of the customer and the critical to quality that we've already covered, imagine they did a customer survey at this particular coffee shop and the customers came back with a few requirements that they wanted from their cups of coffee. One was it has to be hot. Another was that it had to be a strong cup of coffee. And the third was that it had to be free from any bits, because there's nothing worse than having a cup of coffee with bits in the bottom of the cup. Okay, so taking these voice of the customer on board, the coffee shop has now got a certain CTQs that they have to adhere to, and there's certain Y measures that we can attribute to them as well. Now, it's very useful to think of the Y measures as being here in the outputs, okay? So any Y measures that we're looking to do in the measure phase will generally come within the outputs. The X measures, which obviously influence the Ys, they will be here in the inputs. So it's useful now to try and focus your measurement for the next phase of DMAIC to look at the SIPOC and think, well, okay, what measures can I look at here? What kind of measures am I going to need to make in the next phase so I can really get to the bottom of whether or not we're giving the customer what they want. So, for example, the coffee machine with filter. One measure that we could do here would be to check the filter itself. So we could have a measure for looking for tears, because obviously if we had a tear in our filter paper, the likelihood is the coffee would spill through it and we'd end up with the bits in the cup, which was one of the requirements the customers didn't want. Attached to that as the X measure, you could actually go to the filter paper and look at the condition and the quality. It may well be that a certain quality of filter paper is less likely to tear than another quality of filter paper. So as you can see, the Y and the X measures are linked in terms of the tears and the condition of the paper. One of the other things we could look at is the pot of coffee itself. Remember, our customer wanted a hot cup of coffee, so we'd be measuring temperature, and they also wanted a strong cup of coffee. So again, you'd be measuring strength. Now, how you measure strength is really up to you, but it could be just something simple, like how dark the coffee looks. The darker the coffee, the likelihood is it's going to be a strong cup. So if temperature and strength are our Y measures, what are the X measures associated with that? Well, this comes to the electricity and the power. And it may well be that there's actual power setting on the coffee machine itself that has to be set to a certain number so that you get the correct temperature and the correct strength of your coffee. So in this case, your Y measures of temperature and strength could be directly attributable to your X measure of the power setting for the machine itself. Just one more X measure as well, because you don't exclusively have to have a Y linked to an X, is the ground coffee. So again, if we think about the strength, which was a customer requirement, then the X measure of the number of scoops you actually put into the machine, and also the scoop size, is a useful X measure you might want to think about when you get to the measure phase and you're trying to get to that CTQ of the strong cup of coffee that our customer wants. So okay, to review the SIPOC then, it's a tool that's used for giving a good overview of the process. It lets you know who the key stakeholders are and the key inputs and outputs of that process. And you can then take it on a stage to actually attribute different measures to the outputs and the inputs to help you try and focus your measurements when you get into the measure phase of DMAIC.